Guys, buckle your seatbelts. Here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Ayin Ches. We are in the heart of the sugya, whether Tuma is Dechuya B'tzibur, whether Tuma is always an issue, and even when one avoida may be done B'Tuma, it's because the advantage, the koyach of carbon sibur overrides Tuma. But Tuma is an issue, and if it's an issue, it has to be resolved, as we are learning, versus the other way of understanding these dinim, and that is that Tuma is hutra b'tzibur, that when it's a carbon sibur, the issue of Tuma is to begin with a non-issue. It's completely permitted. And one of the nafkaminas is, we spoke out the first one in the intro we gave yesterday, but now we're going to speak out the intro, that whether you need to use the power of the tzitz. Now, the rule is that tzitz, which is one of the garments that the Kohen Gadol wears, it's the crown that he puts on his forehead. It has the power to affect acceptance. This is called tzitz meratze. If Tuma hutra b'tzibur, then you don't need to lean on the koyach of the tzitz. If Tuma dechuya b'tzibur, then dechuya b'tzibur, but if there's an issue of Tuma, at the end of the day, it was tamei, either the people were tamei or the carbon was tamei, the answer for that will be tzitz meratze. However, as we learned that there was a machlokes tanoim, just quickly reviewing, Rabbi Eliezer holds that the tzitz is meratze even on the achilois, not only if the blood was tamei, and by a carbon yachid you should not have brought it, but after the fact it will be accepted by Hashem because tzitz meratze, but even if the parts of the carbon which is called achilois, and as we have been learning, achilois includes the parts that are burnt on the altar. Achilois include the parts that are eaten by the kahanim, or if it's a carbon kachay kalim, the parts that are eaten by the owners. There also, if all of those parts, as we'll get to in a moment, are tamei, there might be a problem. Tzitz meratze al achilois means that when we come to sprinkle the blood, we view all of the edibles as if they are tahor, and therefore you may continue with the avodah. So holds Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yossi, we learned, holds that ein mitzitz meratze al achilois. Tzitz only affects atonement for the avodah of dam, but not for the chelav and the basar. That was one machlokes. Another machlokes, just reviewing. Interestingly, in both of these arguments, Rabbi Eliezer is one of the actors here. And the machlokes number 2 is Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, which is, forget about the whole idea of tzitz and tumah. What happens even if, for example, you lost all of the meat before you sprinkled the blood? Says Rabbi Eliezer, dam afal pi she'ein basar. Of course, it's ideal after you sprinkle the blood for you to be able to continue with the avodah, which is burning the parts on the altar, later the kohanim eating, v'chulei. But if you don't have any basar, Rabbi Eliezer holds the avodah of dam may continue. Rabbi Yeshua holds, no, im ein basar, ein dam. Im ein basar, ein dam. Now, yesterday what we did is that even though we began with the premise that Tuma dechuya b'tzibur, and based on that, the Gemara was wondering whether our Mishnah could be reconciled according to Rabbi Yehoshua, and we concluded on top of Ein Ches Amud Aleph that we could. And that would be because when it comes to a carbon yachid, right, because of the tzitz meratze after the fact, but that's called Tuma dechuya. There was an issue, but you did it anyways, you achieved atonement because tzitz meratze. By a carbon sibur, says the Gemara, will hold it Rabbi Yehoshua. This is according to Rashi, by all of the cases that we had in the Mishnah on Ayin Vav Amid Beis, by the 5 karbanis tzibur that the Mishnah spoke about. Then on top of that, the carbon Pesach, that they are brought betuma, tuma hutra b'tzibur. Tuma hutra b'tzibur. The moment you say hutra, you don't even have to bring up the whole issue whether the tzitz is maratza an achilois, whether the tzitz is not maratza an achilois. Bottom line is we left off that our Mishnah could go according to Rabbi Yehoshua. Now, what we're going to have in part of today's daf is that Shitas Rabbi Yossi, we're going to review Shitas Rabbi Yossi. We're going to ask a similar question. Will our Mishnah be able to go also according to Rabbi Yossi? And the Gemara will attempt to say yes, but at the end we will show, like Rabbi Yeshua, yes. But our Mishnah cannot be reconciled with the Tana Rabbi Yossi. Now, another thing, another loose end, is that yesterday, amongst the many braisas we had on Daf Ayin Zayin Amid Beis, we had a braisa in where Rabbi Yossi says that the Roya Ani, I see virtue both like Rabbi Eliezer, B'Zavachim U'B'Menachos, and like Rabbi Yeshua in Zavachim U'Menachos. That's referring to the second machlokes we just mentioned now. Rabbi Eliezer holds dam afal pisha ein basar. Rabbi Yeshua holds im ein basar ein dam. Rabbi Yossi seems to be contradicting himself. I see virtue in one, I see virtue in the other. And if they're arguing, you can only have to pick a side. You can't see virtue in both. The Gemara will clarify the meaning of that braisa. And on Daf Ayin Ches Amid Beis, we're going to begin a new Mishnah. The Mishnah today won't be about when the tzibur is tamei. No, the tzibur is tahar. But you have a part of one individual Korban Pesach that became tamei. How will that affect the avodah? Guys, this sugya will be connected to everything we're learning right now as well. But it's going to be the new topic. So again, the tzibur is tahar. Korban Pesach has to be brought betara, and it's brought betara. At some point during the avodah, part of the Korban Pesach itself became tummy. Now, even though we learned in the Mishnah Ein Zayin Amid Beis that the uniqueness of a Korban Pesach is not only that it's brought if the tzibur is tamei, but it's even consumed by the individuals, even though they're tamei meis. If most of the Yidden are tamei meis, because the whole ikir of the Pesach is for it to be consumed. Even though this is true, we will learn today that there is a shita, Rav, perhaps Reb Nassan, as we're going to open up the sugya, that if the Korban Pesach was not eaten after the fact, it's going to be a valid Korban Pesach. Now, this is really a machlokes tanoim, but we will learn such a shita that the eating of the Pesach is not essential. It's not ma'akev, and we're going to learn the reasons behind one side and behind the other side, and a lot more. So we are on Daf Ayin Ches, Amud Aleph, mamash in the beginning of the second line. Guys, it's good. We're going to, everything that we've read in the intro, we're going to review again inside. These are not hard gemaras. It's simply you have to have a relatively more than usual amount of information to have clarity in everything that we will be learning. Abyssal joy helps, and coffee also. Says the Gemara. And guys, this is again on the premise that Tuma dechuya b'tzibur. But the Mishnah says that these korbanos tzibur are brought b'tuma. How can you do that? I know you're saying the words dechuya, but it's tamei. It must be because of the tzitz. So the Tanya, we learned again, Rabbi Eliezer holds, hatzitz is meratze even on the achilois. Not that you actually eat. It's that when before you did the dam, you discovered that the achilois are tamei. Nevertheless, being that there is a tzitz, we consider it as if the achilois are okay, and we are allowed to continue with the avodah of the dam. That's the meaning of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yossi says no. Now let me ask you a question.
Post facto. Was that post facto?
Oh, post facto. So very good. You're onto it. And 1 second, Baruch. Exactly. So 1 second. If you're going to hold like Rabbi Eliezer in the other argument, that even though there's no basar, you can offer the dam. If the dam is tahar, even if the basar is physically not here, or if it became tummy, I don't care. So the whole question whether the tzitz is maratza an achilas l'chu'ura is irrelevant. It's inconsequential. Think about it. The whole reason why you have a Rabbi Yossi saying, "Oh, the tzitz is not maratza an achilos." If you don't even need the achilos, then who cares if the tzitz is maratza on it or not? Oh, so therefore, based on that, kosal kadaitach, that me the ka'amar Rabbi Yossi, the fact that he's even arguing with Rabbi Eliezer, and he's saying, "No, the tzitz. If you have a problem with the meat, the tzitz is not maratza. Eina tzitz maratza al achilos." So it's only because for it to be relevant. Rabbi Yeshua svirale. Rabbi Yeshua holds not like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua holds im ein basar ein dam. So for that you need to know, right? That is the tzitz maratza and achilois or not? And Rabbi Yossi says it's not maratza. Okay. Now says the Gemara, if that's the case, based on this premise that Rabbi Yossi will subscribe to Rabbi Yeshua, imein basar ein dam, and Rabbi Yossi says ein atzitz meratze. So now again, name hashta. Let us also say, like we learned yesterday, that the Mishnah daf ayin vav amid beis cannot follow Rabbi Yossi. The Mishnah says that we bring communal karbanos in the state of Tumah. Just want to go back to the post facto. Let's not forget, Baruch, that by karbanos tzibur, it's not only post facto. By karbanos tzibur, we say that lechatchila you could, but the question is, if you need to rely on the tzitz, based on this premise that Rabbi Yossi subscribes to Rabbi Yeshua, imein basar ein dam, then our Mishnah will not be like Rabbi Yossi. Now, guys, everyone, you have to push it chazah what we finished yesterday. Just like the Gemara said yesterday, according to Rabbi Yeshua, tuma hutra, we can say the same thing for Rabbi Yossi. This is also only premised if Rabbi Yossi holds tuma is only the chuya, so you need the tzitz, but if ain't tzitz maratza ala chilois. If Rabbi Yossi holds imein basar ein dam, then the Mishnah cannot be like Rabbi Yossi. But we're going to go through all the steps. So the first thing the Gemara says, no, B'chlal, don't tell me just because Rabbi Yossi says that the tzitz is not maratza on the achilois, it does not mean necessarily that Rabbi Yossi subscribes to Rabbi Yeshua that imein basar ein dam. And I will explain to you why this machloikis, tzitz maratza on achilois, tzitz ein maratza on achilois, is relevant, is consequential, independent of you, whether you say dam afal pisha ein basar or imein basar ein dam. And the Gemara proves it. Rabbi Yossi maybe, Rabbi Eliezer's Fidele, the Amar dam afal pisha ein basar, which by the way, which will explain the Mishnah. And again, in the Mishnah Baruch, it's not the post facto. In the Mishnah, it's tzibur lechatchila. So you can bring a carbon tzibur. The basar is tamei, and on second, the tzitz is b'chlal is not effective, not even post facto according to the. Who cares? Rabbi Yossi will hold dam afal pisha ein basar. If the dam is tummy, you got a problem. If the basar is tummy, there's no problem. Now the dam is tummy, but for that tzitz maratza, everyone holds tzitz maratza on the blood by tzibur lechatchila. But the question is, so why? What if Rabbi Yossi holds that I don't need the meat? Who cares whether the tzitz is maratza on achilos or not? So the Gemara says, counters the Gemara, 1 second. This is not only a question on Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, who's the one that is lenient, he sets the tzitz. The tzitz affects acceptance even for the food. Why did he even need to say that? See, in both of the arguments, there's one actor that's the same, Rabbi Eliezer. Since Rabbi Eliezer also holds explicitly dam afal pisha ein basar, you don't even need basar. So why did Rabbi Eliezer need to say that the tzitz is maratza an achilos when you don't even need the achilos? So really, the relevance of the argument that we have today in the third line at the top of the Amid has to be explained, even which will allow us to say that Rabbi Yossi holds dam afal pisha ein basar. Now let's explain their relevance. And guys, we're going to chazar a couple of fundamental laws in culture. Pigul means that if during the 4 avodas of Shchita, Kabbalah, Hoylach, Zrika, or during the Menachis, Kemitza, Nesina Beklei Sheni, Hoylacha, and Haktara, if either the Kohen or the owner had a thought that they will do some subsequent part, any subsequent part, beyond the time that Hashem allows for that to be done, Machshev is Chutz Lizman, even though the blood was poured on the altar, even though the kemitza was burnt on the mizbeach, whatever is here left, the shenayim by the mincha, the meat of the carbon is called pigul, and if someone eats it, the chayiv kares. And there's a very unusual din, which is that if aside of machsheves chutz lizman pigul, there was another invalidator factor, which l'chayda should make it worse, makes it better. Chiyuv kares is only when the only issue was pigul. If it was pigul and something else, it's going to be invalid, but it's going to minimize the penalty of, there'll be no kares. So number one will be lemikbe pigul. The difference whether you say hatzitz maratz alachilos or not will affect whether in a certain scenario the eating that meat will be pigul. We'll speak it out in a moment or not. And another nafkamina will be ula afuki midei meila. So the kitzer is that meila you're only chayiv if you consumed or you benefited from something that's exclusively God's. So by kachim, from the moment you consecrated an animal, if anyone misappropriated that animal inadvertently for themselves, they're moyel. But hold on. Once you sprinkled the blood, if the avodah was kosher, which means that from now on, after you burn the fats on the altar, the meats will be consumed by the kahanim. Those meats, there's no me'ilah. Interestingly, so when you consecrate the animal, all of the animal is called kachay Hashem, and you moil by using any part of it. But after you did a kosher zerika, the moment that one is permitted to eat the meats, then it was removed from its me'ilah status. Of course, a non-kohen should not consume it, but me'ilah it's not. And here we have komifligi. Now the Gemara explains how this machloikis, whether tzitz manatz alachilas or Rabbi Yosi, will affect both of these dinim. Rabbi Eliezer holds, like we said, that tzitz is meratze ilave, means on it, even on the edible parts. And therefore, what does that mean? That if when the carbon was geschachten, all of a sudden the edibles became tummy. And now when the kohen did the zrika, when he did the zrika, he had in mind that he's going to eat the edibles outside the prescribed time. Is that thought the only invalidating issue here, which will not allow you to eat the meat? You would say, no, there's another issue. The meat may not be eaten because the meat is tummy. And you would think that since there is another reason why the meat may not be consumed, there's another psul over here, that will normally get in the way and disallow pigul to take hold. If you'd say tzitz meratza al achila is beautiful, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, tzitz meratza al achila doesn't mean you can actually eat it. But it does mean that when you did the dam, we view the achilos as if it's tahar. So now the machsheva spiegel is the only invalidating factor. You'll be chayv kares. In other words, the tzitz meratza means umash v'lei ketar. We view the achilas as if it's tahar. And therefore, your machsheva, that you're going to eat the meat chutz lizman v'kava lebe pigol, that will make it pigol. According to Rabbi Yosi, it won't be pigol. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yosi, even if Rabbi Yosi is going to hold that dam, you can sprinkle the blood even though you don't have meat. But if the meat is tamei and you're thinking about eating tamei meat, it's not matzah. If tzitz is not matzah, so then the meat is going. So then the meat is an invalidator to begin with. So then the machshevas chutz lizman is another invalidator. It's another one. Whenever a pigul is not the only one, it's not pigul. The second step will be umapik lemidei me'ilah, which is gavaldik. Which means, when do we say that when you throw the dam by kachim, now since the kohanim can eat the meat, it's not exclusively God's. That's only if the zrikas adam was a kosher zrika. That's only the zrikas adam is matir the meats to be eaten. So now the meats are not only God's. Since Rabbi Eliezer holds that the tzitzis maratza on the achilois, so indeed. So now the meats, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, you may not eat it. But since when you did the dam, when you did the avodas adam, we view the meats as if it's tar. So therefore, if someone now benefited from the meats, he won't be chayiv me'ilah. And on that, Rabbi Yosi argues with both. The Rabbi Yosi savar that loy meratza tzitzilavi. That's what Rabbi Yosi is saying. Eina tzitz meratza al achilos. In other words, v'lei mash v'lei ketar. And therefore, when you had a machsheves chutz lizman, when you did the zrika, it's not the only issue here. This is a problem, but there's another problem. There's another psul. You know what the psul is? The meat is tamei. And therefore, so if someone actually eats the meat, they're going to be penalized for eating tamei meat. But they won't be chayv kares because of pigol. And also, the me'ilah, since the zirikas adam is not being mated anything on any level, because according to Rabbi Yosi, so just like all of the animal was in the category of Yechayev Me'ilah, that continues. The Zrikas Adam didn't downgrade anything because it wasn't mated anything. Having said that, Rabbi Yosi can still hold Dam Afal Pisha Ein Basar. And that's how we can so far say that our Mishnah, yes, goes according to Rabbi Yosi. Says the Gemara Maskal Rav Mari, he nami the Rabbi Yosi Savar, ke Rabbi Eliezer, like we just said. Okay, let's say Rabbi Yosi holds Dam Afal Pisha Ein Basar. And therefore, let's go back to the Korbanos Tzibur all of the karbanos tzibur that the Mishnah mentioned, that are animal karbanos, that have dam, and then they have the remaining parts to be eaten. Okay, even though it's tamei, even though tuma is only duchuya, but at least for the dam, the tzitz is maratza, by karban tzibur baruch, not only post facto, but lechatchila, so you can do that avoida. You can do that, no problem. Bishlem is v'acham, and I'll go even more than that, even by the karban oimer, there are two parts. You have the kemitza, and then you have the shirayim. So even though Rabbi Yossi holds ein hatzitz meratza and the achilos, doesn't matter. But Rabbi Yossi holds that you can make the first step dam, even though you don't have anything later. Fine. And even the lechem apanim nami, even though the lechem apanim were completely divided and eaten by the kahanim, but the matter for the lechem apanim, which is similar to the dam, are the two spoons of frankincense, the bazichen. Problem will be, shtei alechem ha'ikal ha'meimer. Let me explain something about the shtei alechem that we didn't speak out by the Mishnah, and that is like this. Like we mentioned, chametz is never put on the mizbeach, ever. B'chlal, chametz is hardly ever allowed in the Beis Hamikdash. The only two exceptions are 10 of the 40 loaves of a karban toida, which are also only eaten, either one of them is to the kohen and the other 9 by the owners, and the shtei halechem. Now, the shtei halechem was not put on the mizbeach, not even a kemitza of it. But the shtei halechem were linked to the two shalmei tzibur that the Mishnah also spoke about. And you would put one bread on one lamb, one bread on the other lamb. The kohen would wave them both together. Then you would shecht the lamb and you would sprinkle the dam. The moment you sprinkle the dam, that's matir the shtei halechem. Now in this context, there's no kasha yet, because you have dam of the kifsei atzeres, and you have the achilos, which is the shtei halechem. And the shtei halechem, we're saying, may not be brought, but it doesn't stop you from doing the avoida of the dam, because tzitz maratza. Tzitz is not maratza on the achilos. I don't need to have the achilos. Problem is, now this is a detail that we'll learn in Masechta Menachos. What happens if in the Beis Hamikdash they don't have the 2 lambs for the kifsei, for the shalmei tzibur? They don't have the 2 lambs, but there's a mitzvah to bring shtei halechem. Then the shtei halechem is consumed by the kohanim independent of the 2 lambs. Now, in that case, the whole avoid is eating it up. If tuma hutra b'tzibur, then you can eat it up. If tuma's dechoya b'tzibur, so you have to rely on the tzitz. And if we're going to say that Rabbi Yossi holds that the tzitz is not maratza on the achilas in any way, shape, or form, elama dam afal pisha ein basar. What about this case where there's only one, only the basar? And if you're going to say that the Mishnah only mentions the case of shtei halechem when you also have the kifsei atzeres, which is almost always, but then we got another problem. The Mishnah gave 5 cases. One of the 5 cases is shtei halechem. Another one of the 5 cases is the kifsei atzeres. If they only work together, then the Mishnah should not have given 5 cases. The only reason why the Mishnah gave shtei halechem as a standalone case is obviously the Mishnah is also referring to the shtei halechem as it may be eaten, even when, God forbid, we don't have the lambs for the shalmei tzibur. And the chitem ilikadav aleim, no, because then hanu shalmei tzibur. And in kain havalei abova anon chamisha tanan. So if Rabbi Yossi holds dam afal pisha ein basar, you will have a problem according to Rabbi Yossi, who says ein atzitz manatza al achilos with the shtei halechem. So now the Gemara does what it did in the top line in the Amid now, just like by Rabbi Yeshua. All of this is only problematic if you need the tzitz. Who says Rabbi Yossi b'chlal needs the tzitz? Ella, no, the Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yossi. Ella ma, because of Rabbi Yossi that tumah hutra b'tzivu. You don't need the tzitz. By a karban tzibur, there's no issue of tumah. It's completely permitted. So the Gemara says that's not true. By Rabbi Yeshua, that was the end. But by Rabbi Yossi will show that Rabbi Yossi does not subscribe to tumah hutra. The last narrow line, no. For Hakanya, we learned in a brayso, echad zeh ve'echad zeh. I know the next Masechta is Shkolim, but the next one afterwards is Yuma. How does Masechta Yuma begin? That the Kohen Gadol, 7 days before Yom Kippur, was sequestered. He was taken away separated from his family. He was put into the Beis Hamikdash. Why was that done? In order to keep him away from any potential contamination tumah. Not only that, but since he might have become tummy with corpse tumah without his knowledge, to cover that ground, they would sprinkle on him from the ashes of the red heifer which someone who becomes Tomei b'tumas meis, they have to have that sprinkling on the third and the seventh day. We'll get into the third and the seventh in a moment. Not only that, but we'll learn in the beginning of Yom, the Daf Daled Daf Hey, that the Kohen who has the merit to burn the new Para Aduma, the Torah links that Kohen with the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur. Everything that's done to the Kohen Gadol prior to Yom Kippur, the 7-day sequestration, if that's the word, and all of the chumras and all of the preparations, all of that also has to go to the Kohen who is designated to shech the Para Aduma when we ran out of ashes. Now, so says the Braisa, what do we do to them? Not only are they away from everyone, they are living in a place where they cannot become Tamei. Mazanol of Kol Shiva. You sprinkle on these two Kohanim every single day for 7 days from the ashes of the red heifer. Now, another detail in the first white line. First of all, the ashes of the Para Aduma that was made under the direction of Moshe Rabbeinu miraculously never runs out. Not only does it never run out, but all of the subsequent Para Adumais, and like the Rambam writes, from Moshe Rabbeinu's, including Moshe Rabbeinu's, up until now, until Mashiach, there were 9. When Mashiach will come, we're going to bring the 10th and the final one. The ashes of Moshe Rabbeinu has to be mixed in all of the subsequent ones. So why did they make a new Para Aduma? Because they ran out of the old ashes. But they didn't wait to the last second. Once the stock was low, they would burn another one. So they would have at least the ashes of Moshe Rabbeinu's Para Aduma and the ashes of the prior one. That's Mikol Chato'os in the plural. More ways of understanding it we'll learn when we learn Yom Tzpashet late. So they would take the ashes that was needed and they would sprinkle it on this Kohen Gadol and on the Kohen prior to him shechting the new Para Aduma. When? Every day from the 7 days, says Rabbi. Now, 1 second, guys. Why every day from the 7 days? Why every day? He's away from everyone for 7 days. Let's say he just became Tomei Tuma Meis. Fine. So sprinkle on the 3rd day of this separation and on the 7th day. The answer is, Rav Meir holds that you have to sprinkle the ashes on the 3rd day from the Tuma. Maybe he became Tomei yesterday. Maybe he became Tomei 2 days ago. Maybe he became Tomei 3 days ago. In other words, maybe today is the 3rd day. Then maybe tomorrow is the 3rd day. Then maybe the 3rd day is the 3rd day. And then from then on, the next day might be the 4th day. The next day might be the 4th day. In other words, you have to sprinkle ashes every day to make sure that you got it right, that he got the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled on him on the 3rd and on the 7th day. Now, Rav Meir is only machmer, and bottom line is every day of the 7 days. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi says you don't need to do it on the 3rd day. You can become Tomei today. You could have become Tomei Korps Tuma a month ago, a year ago, a decade ago. I don't care. Whenever you begin the 7 days, start counting, and on the 3rd day you sprinkle the ashes. So
what did you say about Moshe's ashes again?
That his ashes miraculously last forever. His ashes are kept together with the Aron HaKodesh and the staff of Aaron and the jug of the manna. These are the articles and they're a miracle that they never run out. They are never depleted.
Rabbi, what happens if you don't get the 3rd day according to Rav Meir? Then you can't become tar?
Then you will not become tar. We're going to learn these details in Yom, guys. We push it slave. But that's not these details over here. Now, second line. Guys, the whole avoid of Yom Kippur is avoidas tzibur. If tuma hutra, lomali azor klal. It doesn't make sense. Tuma d'chuya, that's the whole beauty. Tuma d'chuya means there's a tuma. It's overridden, but you have to rely on something. So if it's tamei in the carbon, you have to rely on the tzitz. If you have the ashes of the red heifer, then get sprinkled. Tuma hutra means it's a non-issue. It's completely permitted. So this type of chumrah, just in case, guys, we're not saying that because tuma hutra b'tzibur, if someone knows that they became tamei, that they should not undergo the purification. We're not saying that. No, this guy this Kohen Gadol doesn't think he's tamei. He doesn't know that he's tamei. We're saying maybe he became tamei. Ad kedei kach, we would not say if tuma hutra b'tzibur. And therefore, that our Mishnah indeed will not follow Rabbi Yossi because of the case of the shtei halechem. Now we have to go back to close up the loose ends. We learned the Baraisa yesterday concerning the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer, guys, let's chazer. Says dam afal pisha ein basar. Rabbi Yeshua says im ein basar ein dam. So we had a Baraisa that Rabbi Yossi says both appear correct. He Sound like a politician. It's either one or the other. You can't take both sides. So Omar, Rav Papa Tobai, I don't understand. That Rabbi Yossi Shtora Mezakeh Lebeitrei. Who? It's like you have a document which is recording a debt, a loan. So imagine the document records Reuven loan Shimon. Someone says the document, from this document I know that Shimon owes Reuven, and the same document says Reuven owes Shimon. It's a one-way loan. You can't pick both sides if they are arguing with each other. The Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yossi, we learned this yesterday. Roy Ani is Divrei Rabbi Eliezer Bizvachim. V'Divrei Rabbi Yeshua Bizvachim. I also see, I find virtue. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'menachos, v'Divrei Rabbi Yeshua b'menachos. And now let Gemara is explaining where the Bryce elaborates. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer Bizvachim shoya oimer dam afal b'shem basar. So Rabbi Yossi says, I find him virtuous. Divrei Rabbi Yeshua Bizvachim that says no. He says the opposite. Imein dam ein basar. By the way, Imein Dam and Basar we already mentioned. That's Lakula Alma. The novelty of Rabbi Yeshua is the next step. Imein Basar ein Dam. There's no Basar, you can't bring the Dam. Also, Rabbi Yossi saying Divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'menachos. Shoya Oimer similarly Kaimetz Afal Pi she'ein sham shirayim. She'ein sham shirayim means if it's tamei, if it's lost, I don't care. Rabbi Yeshua b'menachos shoya Oimer im ein sham shirayim ein Kaimetz. And the next statement is Lakula Alma. Im ein Kaimetz ein shirayim. What does Rabbi Yossi mean? Who is he opining with? So Amalei, he answers, no, mistabra ka'amar. He's not paskening at all. He only heard them argue by Zavachim. All Rabbi Yossi is saying, which is what we said yesterday, is just like they argue by Zavachim, it's mistaber, it's logical to say they argue the same by Menachos. Because a mincha mirrors a Zevach. You have the Kemitza, which is like the Dam. The Shinayim is like the Basar, so it goes the same. In other words, that Tikoy b'Zvachim, when Rabbi Yossi was learning the Sugya of Zvachim, he said that Mestabra Kehech of Liya b'Zvachim, Pliyam Menachos. And when Rabbi Yossi was learning Mesat Menachos, he said Mestabra Kehech of Liya Menachos, Pliyam b'Zvachim. Upa, so Amalei, Rav Papa tells Abai, Nish, no. Hot Tanach, the first statement you made fits. That Kikoy b'Zvachim, when he was learning Zvachim, he said that Mestabra, that just like Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, who were explicitly arguing by Zvachim, just like they argue by Zvachim, by animal korbanos, pliganami by flower korbanos. The Iker Kroi Kiksivi b'Zvachim Ksivi. The main topic is all based on Zvachim. Guys, we learned yesterday, V'asisa oiloi secha habasar v'hadam. Dam zivochecha yishafech habasar teichel. The psukim, right at bottom of Ein Zayin Amud, in the bottom, top of Ein Zayin Amud days. Those psukim are by Zavachim. So they taka argued on Zavachim. So Rabbi Yossi is saying, just like they argue by animals, they argue the same by Menachos. But Kikoy b'Menachos v'Amen Mistabra, that Kehech the Pli b'Menachos Pli nam b'Zvachim, that doesn't fit. V'Ha'iker Kiroi b'Zvachim u'Diksivi. What do I mean? Just like they argued by Menachos. They didn't argue on it. They argued in Zavachim. They extended it to Menachos. But this direction doesn't fit. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi Roya Ani is not just him saying where they argue as well. No, Roya Ani is Rabbi Yossi paskening. But how can you pasken to both sides of the machlokes? Elo loikasha. Roya Ani is Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, who's lenient, who says you can bring the dam even though you don't have meat. That's only benitma. If the meat is physically here, it's halachically problematic. It became tummy. But as long as the meat is here, we can say you can bring the dam. Where does Rabbi Yossi say that Roy Ani Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, but Avud V'Sarov, when it got lost or it got burnt, it's not here? And the Gemara explains, Benitme my tamam does Rabbi Yossi opine with Rabbi Eliezer, Mishum de Meratzitz. That you can't explain it that way, because we just said now in the machlokes that we quoted today, the tzitz, according to Rabbi Yossi, has nothing to do with the edible. So if the meat became tameh, you can't rely on the tzitz. Hashamat leil Rabbi Yossi. The amar eina tzitz menatza al achilos. So if Rabbi Yossi is paskening, he would not be able to pasken on Rabbi Eliezer by tameh because of the tzitz. Elo loy kasha. Roy ani is divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'tzibur. That where the edible portion became tameh, then you can bring the dam. However, Royani is Divrei Rabbi Yeshua by a carbon yachid. The Gemara says it can be either. B'tzibur my tama. Don't forget, we just established that Rabbi Yossi does not subscribe to Tuma Hutra. Rabbi Yossi, yes, subscribes to Tuma Dechuya, Bishum de Tuma Hutra, B'tzibur. And if that would be, if that would be what Rabbi Yossi, first of all, Chada, we just said that Rabbi Yossi holds Tumah is only the Chuya b'tzibur. And therefore, if he agrees with Rabbi Yeshua b'yachid, he should agree with him b'tzibur. Because by tzibur, there's a problem with Tumah. V'oid, b'tzibur, if the Braisa would have been speaking about b'tzibur, Rabbi Yeshua is not going to agree. Rabbi Yeshua machshav v'loy Rabbi Yeshua. No, we just established that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yeshua. Daf Ayin Ches Amud Beis ha'amrat b'tzibur afil Rabbi Yeshua moida, as we learned at the end of yesterday, on top of Ayin Ches, the top line that concluded that Rabbi Yeshua agrees that b'tzibur tuma hutra. You can bring all the karbanos even though there's tuma, whether the kahanim are tamei, whether the animal is tamei. Ella, another explanation in this Braisa. Royani divided Rabbi Eliezer b'di'evet. After the fact, the dam was effective. Divided Rabbi Yeshua lechatchila. What is Rabbi Yeshua lechatchila? Im ein basar ein dam. Yeah, he holds that by a carbon yachid, even if the dam is okay, if the basar is tamei, if the basar is lost, don't bring it lechatchila. The Eved asks the Gemara, didn't we say yesterday again a clear Braisa? Afilu Rabbi Yeshua nami moida diktani moida Rabbi Yeshua she'im Zajac was speaking about a carbon yachid after the fact. Then hurtza. So the Gemara says another nuance. Yes, what we just quote. When did Rabbi Yeshua say that after the fact, even though the basar was tamei, you achieved the Talmud? That's if the basar was here, but it was tamei. That's only betuma. The Braisa, Rabbi Yossi says, I see Rabbi Eliezer here, I see Rabbi Yossi over there, Rabbi Yeshua over there. Ba'avud v'sarif. By avud and sarif, here is where Rabbi Yeshua will not say that after the fact it will be good. But Rabbi Yossi here will paskin like after the fact, like Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, ki ketani moed Rabbi Yeshua, that's im zara kurza, that's only if the issue was tuma. Benitma, Abel ba'avud v'saruf, Rabbi Yeshua will say that if when the dam was sprinkled, there was no meat, there was no edibles, not that goes on the altar, not that's eaten by the Kahanim, even after the fact, Rabbi Yeshua will hold that the dam was not effective at all. Kikama Rabbi Yossi, Royanis, David Rabbi Eliezer, B'di'eved, was ba'avud v'saruf. No, it's B'di'eved, not like Rabbi Yeshua. B'di'eved, Rabbi Yossi will opine like Rabbi Eliezer that after you brought the dam, even though there was no basar mamish, not only no halachic basar because of tumah, the basar got lost. You did the dam, so the owner achieved the acceptance, the atonement. He fulfilled that carbon's obligation. Okay, Chavra, moving on. Now this Mishnah till the end of the Yamid, like we mentioned, it's still connected to these general topics, but we are not speaking about where the tzibur is tamei. We're speaking about carbon Pesach that was brought when the tzibur was tahar. The yachid was tahar. Part of the carbon became tamei. Says the Mishnah. If nitmar basar, if all of the meat became tamei, but the chaylev kayam, it's interesting. Kayam means tahar. The Rishonim speak about why isn't the Mishnah consistent. Nitmar basar v'chaylev tahar, but that's what it means. So then, ein zoyrek es adam. Look inside the first Rashi. This is very important. What did we just come off? Rabbi Eliezer says, dam afal pi she'ein basar. Dam afal pi she'ein basar. So when you read the Mishnah that if you don't have the basar by the Pesach, the Mishnah says don't throw the blood, the first reaction will be, this Mishnah is not like Rabbi Eliezer, which is not the end of the world. Chalal Mishnah are not like Rabbi Eliezer. But Rashi says it's not true. Look inside the top Rashi. This statement is even according to Rabbi Eliezer. Oh, well, 1 second. Doesn't Rabbi Eliezer say that you bring the dam even if you don't have meat? Yes. Pesach is an exception. Why is Pesach an exception? Look inside the Rashi. The Ikar Pesach la'achilas adam ka'asi. So if before you sprinkle the blood, you know that the people cannot eat the meat. You know when you override tuma, or you know when tuma is b'chlal not a problem when the roiv is tamei. This Mishnah is speaking about a case where no, people are taught. There's no dechia for tuma now. Our group's carbon, sadly, the meat became tamei. Says the Mishnah, don't bring it. Pesach is unique. If you know before you sprinkle the blood that you will not be able to eat it, don't bring it. Now, whether if you sprinkle the blood after the fact, will we achieve our carbon Pesach? even though we can't eat it, that will be the whole Gemara. Okay. Next case, however, in the opposite, if nitma hachelev, that which has to go on the altar became tummy. But the basar is good, the basar is tahar. Says our Mishnah, Zajac as Adam, you may throw the dam. Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, of course, right? Rabbi Eliezer says that dam afal pisha ein basar. Here again, Rashi says this statement goes according to Rabbi Yeshua. Why does it go according to Rabbi Yeshua? Because when Rabbi Yeshua says you need to have both dam and basar, we said this already yesterday, he didn't mean that you need to have both achilas mizbeach and achilas here, the ba'alim. You don't need both. You don't need both. You need, according to Rabbi Yeshua, to make sure that the dam is not the last thing you're doing. The dam should be a matir, which is what it is. After you throw the dam, now you can do the next step, which is normally offering the fats on the altar. Now, if the fats cannot be offered on the altar, there is still a next step. What's the next step after the chalav and veivadim? The owner's eating the korban pesach. So as long as you have the dam as a matir, even though Rabbi Yeshua says im ein basar, ein dam, there is basar. It's important. In other words, everything we learned in the Mishnah, the Reisha can go according to Rabbi Eliezer. This statement actually only goes according to Rabbi Yeshua, but it goes according to Rabbi Yeshua. And to contrast, by other karbanos which are not the Pesach, then we will say, you also can be Zajac the dam, even according to Rabbi Yeshua. Because according to Rabbi Yeshua, generally, if you have either achilas mizbeach or achilas kahanim, achilas ba'alim, you can do the avodas hadam. Pesach is unique. Because like Rashi writes, the ikir Pesach la'achila. But if the basar is tahar, that's the chiddush, then you throw the dam. And again, how did the Mishnah begin in the Reisha? That if the meat is tummy, even though the chalev is okay, the Mishnah doesn't say puzzle. The Mishnah says, don't throw the blood. So on that, Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav, that will be the whole end of today. That Rav Gidel said in the name of Rav, I know the Mishnah says that you should not throw. That's called lachatchila. But post facto, Bidi Eved says Rav, im Zajac hurtza. Now appreciate a big chiddush here. Because we just said that Iker Pesach la'achila. Let's get something clear. If our groups, Korban Pesach, sadly, if the meat becomes tummy, you know what that will mean? That will mean, and we already knew this by the Zrika, we knew that the meat is tummy. It means that we will not eat it. And if you're telling me that the Iker Pesach is for us to eat it, then maybe we would have to bring a Korban Pesach Sheni. No, you don't. No, you don't. You shouldn't have thrown the blood. But even though in this circumstance, the Pesach was not consumed, he will hold that we still achieved our mitzvah, we fulfilled our obligation of Pesach. We need not bring a Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara says this is all Shitas Rav. This is obviously subject to our Achloikas Tanoim, as we'll see in a moment. It's not essential. It's not essential to attain acceptance. I know, when it says in Parshas Boy, Ish Lefi Acholoi, right, each man according to what he eats, which means that it has to be eaten. Oh, that's the mitzvah. That's the rule by Kachim. When God says something once, it means it's a mitzvah, but it's not le'ikura. Says the Gemara, no, la'akev loy v'hatanya. Now we're going me'inyan, but it's going to be, we're going to come back to this ish lefi achli, which will be very important. When it comes to the other concept of us needing to pre-register people, where is that learned from? From the same verse, where it says b'michsas. B'michsas means literally according to the number of the people. According to the number of the people. So b'michsas malamed she'ena pesach mishchat ela l'menuyev. Prior to shechting it, you have to already decide, I'm registered. We have to pre-register. Now, yachol shchati shaloi l'menuyev. But it should still be kosher, because by kachim, if Hashem does not repeat something twice, then it's not leikuva. No, it's repeated twice. Talmud Loimed in the same verse where it says ish lefi achloi tachaisu, each person according to what he eats. Shall you count? It's repeated. Hakasav shana olav la'akev. Now the same verse, which is regarding the pre-registration, which is repeated regarding the pre-registration, it is in this verse that we have the words ish lefi achloi. So we're makish the ikuva also to the obligation you have to eat it. The iskash oichlan lemenuyin. This is a braisa. Yeah, I know Rav at the end last resort, Rav, Tana, Upalik, but we don't want to go there. We don't have to go there because we're going to find another Tana that disagrees with this Braisa. Amara, Ela, Rav, Domakar, Nasan. Shkoyach, you found a nice Braisa. The Braisa makes a hekesh. Not everyone has to agree with this Braisa. But guys, by Menuyav, there's no debate. By Menuyav, the Torah explicitly repeats it twice. B'michsas tachoisu. That's called shana. Eating is not repeated twice. It's in the same verse. He rejects that. The Amar Rab Nasan holds achilas psachim lema akva. And now the only beauty is that when that was stated in the Beis Medrash, the people that really knew everything, they couldn't figure out what Rab Nasan are you talking about. Where is that read? Where do we have such a price? Zog the Gemara, hi Rab Nasan, ilay mahar Rab Nasan. I'll tell you where. The Tanya it says, Rab Nasan Omer, b'nayin shekol Yisrael yotzim Pesach echad. That all of the Yidden theoretically, or take out the word theoretically, that all the Yidden can be yotzim by bringing one animal. Now, guys, let's not forget that if it's essential that everyone eat a kazayas, there ain't an animal large, even the shot habar could be, but the shot is not good. Oh, that's right, that's the answer. The shot habar is big enough, but we have to bring it from tsoim. Nowhere do we have in Chazal that there is a psalam or a sheep that is big enough that when you shecht it, there's enough at least for a kazayas for every yid that's obligated to eat the Koren Pesach. But Rav Nosson says it's good because it says, look at the plural singular. V'shachatu is plural. They shall slaughter. Oisoi is it. It is lashon yachid. L'choy, that means that we shecht one animal. V'shachatu oisoi kol kaladas yisrael ben arba'im. So Rav Nosson says v'chikol akol shechtin. Hold on. The singular cannot go on the. The plural v'shachatu cannot go on everyone because there is only one shechet. Ella, they, it means, that all of us become menuyin on one animal. Now, if Rab Nosson will hold, like we had just had before, the Tana before, that eating it, even post facto, if it's not eaten, right, then you're not yoitza, then how would you be allowed to do that? Now, you get that it's not exactly the same. Here we're speaking about meat that's tamei, that is halachically inedible. Case of Rab Nosson is that meat is edible, but there isn't enough to pass around. That's not exactly the same, and that's the Gemara's answer. The Gemara says no. Maybe Rab Nosson holds that if you shech the Pesach and no one eats the meat, the Koren Pesach did not fulfill its obligation. When all the Jews will be using, if all the Jews will use one animal, that meat will be eaten. There'll be a fight over it. It will be consumed. It's just that the individual won't eat of it. Every individual can say during the shechita, I'll be the one who's eating it. Let's say this animal is enough for 10 people. And you have, 18 million Jews on it. Every group of 10 can say, maybe right before we shecht it, all the others will decide to find another animal. We'll be the only men standing over here. Theoretically, every group can say, I was going to consume it. So when you shechted it, they were going to eat it. And the other group says the opposite. Unlike the case that we are discussing, which is that the animal, when you shecht it, the meat is tummy. The Mishnah says don't do it. But where Rav is saying the b'diavad, if you shechted it, knowing that none of it will be eaten, how can that be okay? That's something else that we don't see from this Rav Nosson. Indeed, we don't see it from this Rav Nosson, another Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson the Tanya. Nimnu olav chabura achas. Chabura achas means that a large group, the goal is for everyone to have one kazais. So let's say that you need 50 people. I'm guessing. Maybe you need 100 people. I don't know how many people are needed. When each one only eats a kazayas to completely eat all of the edible parts of the animal. However, now there were so many people, if my Zaidi would say in Brazil, there were so many minyanim from the machlokes that it was so stretched thin that every minyan had exactly 10 people. I'm going to get noch ein minyan that kind of can minyan the shuvin. Sometimes you come to the limit. If you add one other person, no one will have the kazayas. So you reach the boundary. And then another whole group pre-registered on the same animal. Okay, this is not all the Jewish people, but it's very similar. So, and you shechted it. So what's the rule? Says the Baraisa. Rishonim sheshlam kazayis. They were the ones that registered first. They registered knowing that they will have a kazayis indeed. They eat their kazayis upeturin from doing the other Pesach. However, achronim, the next group of people that decided to join and to pre-register on the same animal, and indeed there was nothing for them, there was nothing left. She'elam kazayis, so ein oichlin, and therefore v'chayavim lasos Pesach sheni. Clearly, the Stana holds that achila is ma'akev. If you did not eat, you did not fulfill your obligation. Rav Nosson says, Elu ve'elu puturim lasos Pesach sheni. Look at his words. Shekfa nizrak hadam, because the blood was sprinkled. In other words, post facto, blood is the ikar. Even though, again, everyone holds that ikar Pesach la'achilas adam kasi, true. But if the dam was sprinkled, then you're good. Now, you can argue what proof do you have here more than before? You can give the same logic. Each group theoretically could have eaten it, right? The second group also could have said that if the first group backs out, we'll have the food. So, how do you have a proof? So the Gemara says, no. Look at the words of Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson, who says that everyone fulfilled their obligation, should have said, because if that is needed. But he didn't say that. Rav Nosson says that everyone fulfilled their obligation post facto because shekfar nizrak hadam. Clear. Shma mino b'dam talia milso. Abel nervous then la'achila loy ma'akve. Clearly, so that's the Rav Nosson that the Rav is going to be leaning on. Now, guys, tomorrow, Amir Tzashem, let's get to the bottom of the Amid. We're going to give another approach to Rav. But now this is the approach that Rav subscribes to Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson holds that achila is a mitzvah. Achila is not ma'akev. So after the fact, even though the meat was tummy, you're good. Now, says the Gemara, I don't understand Rav. We are clearly saying it's a machlokas tanoim. And the Braisa that we just quoted, the proof of the Rav Nosson, that Tanakama has no name. So we're going to call that the Chachamim. Chachamim versus the Rav Nosson. Why did Rav say that our Mishnah is only lechatchila, right? And it only follows Rav Nosson. Why didn't Rav learn our Mishnah different? Then when the first line in our Mishnah says, Nitma basar v'chelev kayom, ein zoyde kasadam, Rav should have said, and if you threw the blood, no good. You got to bring a Pesach Sheni. Answers the Gemara. Rav must listen. Kasha say Rav was being medayek in the words of the Mishnah. Amai. Let's get the parentheses. Does the Mishnah write ein zoydek es adam? That's the first words, the first clause. Ein zoydek es adam. Let's be symmetric. Let's be consistent with the words that were used up until now. When a carbon is invalid, you know what the Mishnah said? Pasul. Pasul means even post facto. Litna pasul. Ella, no, Rabbi was medayik. It says, Einoi zoydek. Ella shmamino, zoydek l'chatchila v'liyav shaper dami. Okay, now let's focus on Rav Nosson. Reflecting him on him. Ule Rav Nosson. Ish, lefi acholi lamili. This verse that we just quoted, each man according to what he eats. You're saying that you don't have to eat it. No. There is something that is essential. The Be'inan Gavra answers the Gemara, the Chazi Lachila. Don't confuse meat that's tamei to the man for whom you are slaughtering the animal. Guys, but let's not get confused, right? There's pre-registration. Remember the Mishnah Samach Aleph? Then what was the first case? The first case is that the people who are registered on the animal cannot be sick. We're not speaking about Hilchas Tumah. We're speaking about they cannot be old. They have to be people that are able to eat at least a kazayis toich kedei achilas pras. Remember that? That is essential. The people who are registered, they have to be able to eat. Now, if the meat became tamei, so you will not eat it, that is where Rav Nosson says, okay, b'diavad, that's okay. You did the zrikas adam, you're okay. But what is needed is that the person for whom you are slaughtering it has to be someone that's able to eat it. Now that we established that as Shitas Rav Nosson, we're going to go through three braises and we're going to question who is the author of the braisa. Now that we have the machlokes between Rav Nosson and the Chachamim, and now that we limited that Rav Nosson's leniency is only regarding the meat, but the person has to be chazi. So number one, braisa number one, who's the author of the following braisa? Where it says that shachatu lo'oichlav is what we just mentioned now. That the people who are registered, they have to be able to eat it, not halachically, physically. It's very old people, or God forbid, sick people are unable to eat a lot of meat. They cannot eat a kazayas within that 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, achilas pras zman. So shachatu lo'oichlav, which is what's needed. Another detail, we had this already above that. But when zrikas adam was made, the intent was that this will be eaten by other people who are unable to eat it. So says the Braisa, Pesach atzmoi kosher. Va'adam yotzi yedei chavasoi. So L'choura says the Gemara, this can only follow Rab Nosson and not Rabbanon. Why is that? In other words, the Havamin of the Braisa is saying that you can do the avoid of the blood, you can burn the chaylev, but the meat should not be, even though the meat can be eaten, right? Because it was done b'machsheves sheloi lo'oichlav. So it must follow Rab Nosson that says that you don't have to eat it. It says the Gemara, no. Afilu teim rabbanon. There's a rule that we spoke this out on Samach Aleph. When it comes to invalidating thoughts, interestingly, unlike everything we learned in Zvachim, machshavas chutz hamakim, psul, machshavas pigul, is effective during any one of the four steps, shchita, kabbalah, hoilach, and zrika. When it comes to this machshava lo'oichlav, the only time where a machshava sheloi lo'oichlav will negatively affect the Koren Pesach is if it was had only during shchita. And that was the rule, that ein machshavas oichlin bezrika. So that's why it Bechlal did not invalidate the carbon. He thought during the zrika that it will be consumed by people that can't eat it. It didn't affect the animal. It did not invalidate the animal. The animal may be eaten. If the animal may be eaten, it can go according to the Chachamim because the animal is going to be eaten. Right. Next. Braisa number 2. Who's the author of this Braisa where it says during the shchita, the people were all sick. That means they were unable to eat it. We're all speaking about the sheloi lo'oichlav. But they became healthy during zrika. Now don't confuse a intent for, that's one sugya. I know it's similar, but it's not the same. Now we're not speaking about an intent. Now we're speaking about the reality. There were 10 people. The Kohen had in mind for those 10 people. When he shechted the animal, those 10 people were all chayla. So it was shaloi lo'oichlav. But they became healthy during zrika, or the opposite. They were cholim. Cholim means healthy. During the shechita, they were healthy. But they became ill before the zrika. Says the Braisa, ain't sheichtem mizarkan olav. You may not do the avoida achi cholim. They have to be healthy, both misashchita and shazrika. So here again, name of that this should only follow the Rabbanan and not the Rabbi Nosson. Because since Rabbi Nosson holds that the meat need not be eaten, so therefore the Havamin is he would be more lenient. Yeah, the person has to be healthy during the shchita. But Rabbi Nosson will hold that if during the zrika he got sick, it's not the end of the world. Now again, don't confuse us with machshavas. This is not machshavas. This is the people themselves. But still, Rabbi Nosson is more lenient. So the Gemara says what we're saying now will be debated indirectly in a few lines. No, Braisa number 2 can even follow Rabbi Nosson, like we said in the first wide line. Where is Rabbi Nosson's leniency that if the meat is tamei and therefore it was not eaten, b'diavad you are okay, but that the person has to be chazi la'achila? Rabbi Nosson agrees with the Chachamim. And when does he have to be fit to eat it? Not only during the shchita, even during the zrika. Ein machsheves oichlin bezrika. But the person has to be fit. Gavroch the chazi la'achila ba'ina throughout. So says the Gemara. I know it's late. Let's chop it until the end. Now next, man tana lohadu tana rabbanan. Who's the author of the third Braisa, which is shachatu betara. If you shechted the Koren Pesach betara. Amazing. And then nitmu haba'olim, then the owners became tamei, which means now the owners cannot eat it. Yizrek adam betara, make sure the kohen is tar, but va'al yechol basar betuma. In other words, we allow the zrika even though the owners are unfit. So again, come on. So l'chayra Amar Rabbi Elazar the Amayra l'chaura. This should be mamachleikes shenuya. This should be dependent the argument, and it should only follow Rabbi Nosson. Because according to the Chachamim, l'chaura, since they will not be able to eat it, right? Because they are tamei, then the zrika should not be done. So Rabbi Yochanan says, and this Rabbi Yochanan will challenge the authorship of the second Braisa, even according to everyone. He won't hold with that. Rabbi Yochanan, the case of the third Braisa is halkap Imagine. They shechted the Pesach, and then the majority of the tzibur became tamei. Now, when the majority of the tzibur is tamei, really, tuma is hutra b'tzibur, the chuya b'tzibur. So let's go inside. That the tzibur, they became tummy after the shechita. Somehow you shechted the animal and everyone became tummy. So that's the nafila b'tuma nami avdi. That's why the Brisa says, even according to the Chachamim, that you sprinkle the dam. Hold on. If everyone became tummy, amai eina basanechel b'tuma. Gavaldike kasha. What did we learn in the Mishnah? Ein vav amid beis. That was the whole beauty. That the unique space after it's eaten b'tuma. So he says, hold on. If everyone became tamei before the shechita, yes, you eat the Pesach. What was the case of the Braisa? People were torn by the shechita. They became tamei before the zrika. So we're asking, why can't they eat it? Let me give you the opposite case. What happens if when you shechted it and you threw the dam, everyone was tar? But only later did everyone become tamei. Here, everyone will agree that the people may not eat it. If everyone became tamei, if the avoida was done betara, then no one can eat it. So the reason why the Braisa says that you may not eat it, only after the zrika. And so if they're going to eat it this year, they're going to say, and last year we were not tummy and we ate it, so now we should also eat it. In other words, if they will eat it, even though they became tummy before the zrika, if you're going to say eat it, theoretically you couldn't eat it, then they will wrongfully apply it even in a case where everyone became tamei after the zrika. And they won't remember the shtaket last year, that when the zrika happened, they were already tamei. And theoretically, if the people were tamei during zrika, then they can even eat it. But now they were tahor, so now it's forbidden to eat. Bottom line is that the Rav who said that the ratio of the Mishnah is only lechatchila, but im Zajac Adam Hurtza is following Rav Nassan, and from there, God willing, continue tomorrow. That was the biggest daf we had here. That's it. It's going to get a little bit shorter. Svika, you thought you ran away. Where's Svika? He ran away.
No, I'm here.
Here, yeah.
You trapped him good. Don't worry. He's here. Good. We're all hooked, Rabbi.
Yeah, it's going to get easier, guys. Don't worry. And this is